Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Happy New Year. I hope you smiled so much during the new year already. Thank you for joining us today. As you can imagine, I am thrilled, as I always am, to do this show. And I cannot wait for you to hear my friend and colleague, Sam Tinklenberg, grace us with his presence. Thank you, Sam, for joining us.
Yeah, anytime. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. You may or may not have seen Sam and I palling around DEF CON last year. And if you did, then you would have understood why I asked him to be on the show. But for those of you, or for those people who have not had the pleasure of meeting Sam and learning from him, Sam, why don't you introduce yourself and tell people why they should listen to you?
Sure. So yeah, as you mentioned, my name is Sam Tinklenberg. I am a senior security researcher on Akamai's WAF threat research team. Essentially, what that means is my team, we are the ones that um, do the research, build, make changes, fix Akamai's WAF, which is known as ACE or Adaptive Security Engine. And yeah, that's what I do here.
I love it. I love it. So, what's your favorite part of your job?
Um, Favorite part of the job, there are a lot of things, but I think at heart, I'm an engineer, so I really like fixing things. However, a the best part about that at Akamai is fixing things, fixing complex problems, not just in a way that works for one customer, but has to work for thousands of customers.
Mhm.
Um, yeah.
Oh, that's exciting. Yeah, definitely. Talk about impact. Like you have impact at scale and it's really cool to see. I've learned so much from you like internally. So I'm just really excited to have you on here. Um
Yeah.
so thank you, Sam, for that introduction. For those of you who have been to the show before, welcome back. Thank you. You know how this is going to go. For those of you who may be new here, also welcome and thank you. I'm going to give a really quick little update on some things that went on here at Akamai with between now and our previous show, and then Sam and I will kick it off into the show entree, which is going to be a really exciting discussion. On authentication libraries. Okay, there's your little teaser. So first, some news updates. Now, the first two I'm going to mention, I did actually mention in our previous show, but it was around the holidays. So I want to make sure that if you missed it, you have a chance to go back to some pretty great research. First, the year in review 2024. So our State of the Internet reports, which we've been doing for over a decade now, we did a year in review and look ahead with 6 cybersecurity people here at Akamai. I was one of them. And the link to that, it will be in the show notes here. There's also going to be another show about this that we're going to be doing live next week. So definitely tune in there from there. That link to register is also in the show notes. We also had Teaching an Old Framework, New Tricks. This was a piece of research by Tomer Peled on the dangers of Windows UI automation. A theme that we will carry throughout the show today is that things that can be used for good can also be used for bad. Oops. So definitely check that out. We also had another Mirai variant. Did you ever fix that IoT thing? A Mirai variant that was able to propagate through some Did You Ever equipment. I'm so sorry. Lost my breath there. And that's really good. And last but certainly not least, what you should know about breaking WAF. So this was all actually quite pertinent to Sam here. There was a vulnerability or something, I don't know what word you want to use for this, that was called breaking WAF. And we did actually put some information there that if you are concerned about it or were concerned about it, definitely go check that out. So I think this is the shortest amount of time I've ever used on news updates. So I guess I can check that off for starting 2025 out as more efficient than 2024. What a concept. Which I do think kicks in very, very well to our show entree, which, as I teased before, was authentication libraries. And who better to kick it off than someone named Sam? So Sam'll kick it off for us.
Oh,
I've been waiting to do
anytime.
this.
I mean, it works. It works. Um, so yeah, authentication libraries. There's a bunch of them, right? Um, Specifically in this talk, we're going to focus more on Aura, sorry, single sign-on authentication libraries. And in the scope of these, there are two main ones that stand out. One is OIDC, OpenID Connect. This is what is used when you see those like login with Google, login with Apple buttons on whatever website.
Right.
They're typically used more for consumer-facing applications. But the other most popular one is SAML, which is Security Assertion Markup Language, but we're just going to call it SAML. And that is more frequently used in situations like most of your corporate level applications will be using SAML as single sign-on. And why does that matter? So essentially, single sign-on means that you only have to remember one password. You log into whatever your organization uses, and then you can sign into whatever application with just a single password. Yeah.
Yeah, it's so I really loved this topic whenever Sam and I were discussing what we were going to discuss on this show. This was one authentication libraries was suggested, and I literally squealed. Sam can attest to this because number one, this is probably the nerdiest topic we've had on this show yet, and this is now a challenge for my future guests to try and top this. But also because I think it really ties into to a big theme that we saw last year and we are going to see even further, which is the title of the show, Old Threats, New Year, Old Threats. So these libraries are critical, and they're going to continue to be critical as we move forward. Because don't reinvent the wheel. We have things that work, and the technical barrier to entry has lowered. This is something I love to talk about. If you've heard me speak, I've said this many times. But that's not only lowering for the attackers. That's how I usually discuss it. But it's also lowering for the good things too. So somebody who has a great idea, they have a new product they want to sell, they can now spin up an entire website and an entire business truly with zero coding knowledge, and that is only going to get more prevalent. And so talking about libraries, I think, is critical right now because they're critical now. They're going to be even more critical in the future. So do you agree with that, Sam?
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for mentioning it. But one of the reasons why what we're going to talk about is a bigger problem than what it could be, than what it is just by itself, is that many of these open source libraries are used by entire industries, and like many different organizations use the same thing because, like you said, don't reinvent the wheel, right? Authentication is hard. You should just use something that is already built, that works, does things well, right? And that's a lot easier to do than just building it yourself, and more secure because it's been tested more and has a lot of eyes on it.
Sure. Definitely in the open source community, because that is the whole point of the open source community. So when we were discussing this, you had a wonderful little story that also ties into your time here at Akamai. Do you want to start there, or do you want to start with some of the XSW vulnerability like we discussed before?
Let's start with a little bit of background, so
Sure.
we can go into that story a little bit more. So what we want to talk about is SAML. So as I mentioned, it's a single sign-on authentication library. The basic gist of it's very complex. I could probably talk for hours about it, but essentially you have a client, which is the user. You're trying to log into this application. The application is called the service provider. They're the ones that will validate the SAML response, which is generated by the identity provider. So the identity provider is the one you give your username and password to. They validate it, and then they generate a SAML response, give it back to the client, and then the client presents that to the application. And then the application then has to validate that, and will then allow the user into the application with whatever permissions. Now, there are a lot of different security considerations when it comes to this, but the most important thing is validating integrity.
Right.
Because since the client is the one presenting the SAML response, the application doesn't necessarily know where the client got that from. Did the client just generate it themselves? Did they actually get it from the identity provider? You have to establish that line of trust.
Right.
And for SAML, that is done with private and public key pairs and signatures.
Mm-hmm.
So different parts of the SAML response will be signed with a SAML signature. And that is how the service provider is able to tell that the response is legit and can be trusted. So, what happens when that isn't done correctly? This is a whole class of vulnerabilities that has been around since, the origins
Right.
of SAML, but
Sure.
they came into the spotlight back in 2012, so relatively old, but they keep on coming back. And so, what is a SAML signature wrapping or SXW vulnerability? Um, Basically, it boils down to being able to add your own assertion. So,
Mhm.
an assertion is what is generated to represent me or you, whoever's logging into the application. So, it'll say, "This is Sam. Here's his user ID. These are his permissions. This is what he's allowed to, or this is how long this thing is valid for," and then a signature saying, "Hey, I'm the IDP. I'm the one that generated this. You can trust this." Um, so signature wrapping is there are a lot of different nuances and ways to do it, but essentially it's being able to add your own evil assertion
Mhm.
that then contains the signature from an original valid assertion. So to exploit this, basically, I would log in, assuming I have credentials. So yeah, there is some barrier of entry, but
Sure.
so I log in, get the SAML response, and then I add my own assertion, and then point it back to the signature of the original assertion, which is valid.
Right.
Um, and then when it's processed, it'll follow that pointer to the original assertion, be like, "Hey, this is valid," and which will then validate the evil assertion.
Yeah.
Now
We're
it's
good.
very
Go on.
technical and complex, but very quick, quick and dirty explanation.
Love it.
But yeah, so this is you most of the time it's due to the differences between XML and SAML. So SAML is built on top of XML, or not built on top of, but uses XML.
Right. Sure.
Um, and a SAML signature is a valid XML signature, but an XML signature is not necessarily a valid SAML signature. And that's where these confusions and discrepancies get introduced. Because if you're writing the code, it says validate the XML signature, which it is. It is an XML signature, but that's not good enough when it comes to SAML.
Right.
Because an XML signature can be present anywhere in an XML document and validate anything in the XML document. But specifically for SAML signatures, it has to be inside the assertion, or else you run into issues like signature wrapping.
Sure. So on that note, because we're already like at time here. I can't believe we already do this every single month I say the same thing. So could you, going on that note, what are some practical things that you could tell people today or tomorrow even that they can do to fight against this? Because again, old threats, new year. These vulnerabilities keep being reintroduced into these libraries over and over again because the attackers also don't reinvent the wheel. They do things that are going to work. So,
Yep.
and I think a lot of it is predicated on what you said. So, do you have any practical advice before we wrap up here?
I think the most practical thing is to actually validate these libraries, right? Go and try to simulate these attacks because, like you mentioned, most of the time you're using open source libraries, and over every few years, these libraries tend to reintroduce this vulnerability after it's been fixed.
Yeah.
So I went back over like the last 2 years of CVEs, and I found at least three probable cases of this vulnerability being reintroduced in a library at some that has been fixed at some previous point. Um, so the best thing is to just validate it, right? Or have known good libraries, but it also depends on what language you're using.
Right.
Um, yeah, maybe if there's enough like need for it, we can write a future blog or something about how to actually validate these libraries and what to look out
Oh,
for.
I love that idea. I love that idea.
Yeah.
That's so we'll certainly take that offline. Um, with that, wonderful advice. Thank you so much, Sam. We are past time actually. So please join me next month on the 20th of February will be the episode 16. Cannot believe we're already at 16. You can check out our attachments tab as I mentioned at the beginning of the show that will have every link that we have covered on this show. Be sure to stick with us. We want to hear from you. On brighttalk@akamai.com is where you can email us directly with questions, concerns, comments, jokes, songs, even whatever floats your boat, for future topics or just feedback on the show. We want to make sure that this is actually useful to you. And you can stay, the most easy way to stay up to date with us is at our SIG page. That is akamai.com/security-research, or on social media at Akamai_research. Thank you very much, and Cybernara, y'all.